Sweet.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Tuesday.
Hey,
It's the latest installment of our ongoing series, Hear from Your Peers. And we have a really fun and interesting topic for you today. This is one of the better titles that we've ever had. Now that we've leveled the playing field, what game are we playing? So before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of quick things. One of the big questions that we always get, so first of all, there's a questions panel that you should be able to see. You should see a little widget on your screen that looks like this. And there's a questions panel there, and we have someone monitoring that question panel in real time. So if you click on that, you can type your question in and get an answer to it. Now, I will tell you the most often question that we ever get is, will you be sharing the slides from this presentation? Yes, we will. Following today's session, we will send you a link to the recording, and we will send you a downloadable version of the slides from today's session. And I'm going to keep repeating that because that question does tend to come up more than once. I also want to let you know that the next Hear from Your Peers that we have coming up is with Trumbull County, and we're going to talk with a district in Ohio about some of their equitable identification practices. So I hope you'll be able to sign up and join us for that one. That is on Wednesday, March 22nd. That'll be at 12 o'clock noon Eastern Time, cascading 11:10, 9 Pacific. So join us for Trumbull County. But today we are meeting with Dr. Michael Elder from Onslow County here in North Carolina, one of the very most beautiful spots down near the beach. And he is the director of college and career readiness for his district, but he has served in a role with GT for many years with the district, and some of the things that have come under his purview over time. He's very interested in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, as you'll hear today. International baccalaureate. He's worked very closely with advanced placement, and also something, Michael, that I don't know much about called AVID, which is advancement via individual determination. So I don't know if you want to touch on that today or not. My name's Vickie Driver. Many of you know me, may have met me at conferences or seen me on other webinars. And I work for Riverside Insights specifically on the COGAP program. However, what Michael has to talk about for us today is much broader than just the assessment piece. He's doing some very interesting and exciting work. And in part, what we're going to hear about today from him is some of his data from his dissertation study. So it's going to be really cool. I want to make Michael the presenter so that he can share his slides. And again, we will be sending these over to you folks once we finish today's session. And also, as your questions arise, please type them into the question panel, which we will be monitoring real time during this session. So, Michael, I'm going to make you the presenter. Ready to go.
Right. It's always the scariest part of the whole time, isn't it, Vickie? There we go. So let me go ahead and click on there. And if that works, we can figure out anything else together, right? So
I see your slides.
All right. So thank you to Vickie. Thank you to Riverside for the chance to share a little bit today. I promise I will not turn this into a dissertation topic discussion, but there is plenty of data behind a lot of this. I told the Riverside team, and they graciously said, sure, go for it. I believe in the power of story. I believe in the power of analogies. And so I hope that some of this will hit you in the academic side, and then some of it may just hit you in the feels a little bit to say, you know what, that's something we can think about. So thanks for sharing this time with me. I know I'm working in a school district right now. It's just ramping up, right? Like everything is getting real. So thank you for the work that you do for gifted and talented kids and all kids out there. So having said that, we're going to jump in here a little bit. as Vickie alluded to, we started some of this work with the concept of, hey, similar to a lot of folks, let's level the playing field. Let's try to figure out who has the most accessible points and keep them on track. And then let's also bring some other kids into the game as well. And so this visual that you see in front of you here is of BYU. I wish I could say I know something about this baseball stadium. I don't, except for that it is a beautiful picture, right? And when you look at it, it just really, for me, it captures that story element, right? BYU probably has one of the most picturesque views in all of sports, but can you imagine if they hadn't flattened out this piece for the baseball field, right? Or that if we tried to play any sport other than maybe skiing, the slopes really would be a big disadvantage, right? It would just be unfair if we were asking kids to play baseball up there on those slopes, right? It would be very frustrating. And ultimately, it would probably just cause a lot of people to quit, right? I'm not playing up there. That's crazy. Like, you can't chase it down. It's going to be nuts. But at the same time, if you found somebody on those slopes who could play baseball really well, that would seem pretty amazing. Even if they were just mediocre playing on the mountain, like, imagine what they would do when the playing field would be leveled for them. And that's kind of the concept, right? So this is kind of where we begin, and hopefully that'll carry our conversation today. So there'll be a couple themes, right? This leveling the playing field. You're also going to see down there in the right-hand corner this idea of opportunities to shine. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit, and then look at some of the data that supports it and just some conceptual pieces. So just know this is a step on the journey for us. I never want to share and feel like we have it all figured out. I hope that we're all on this journey together and that we're all helping each other along the way. But I will also challenge us a little bit and just say, as we start leveling playing fields, maybe even before we start leveling the playing fields, we kind of need to decide, what is the game that we're playing? What are the services that we're offering? Because if we fail to do that in advance or in the middle of the process, we could create a field or create services for a group of kids that we've identified and they don't match, right? And so one of the things we'll kind of end today's session with is looking at that ability profile and how we match the ability profile to the services that we're attempting to offer. Again, I will never say that it's perfect, right? We're all on a journey here. So lots of things to think about, lots of things to work through. I promised you an analogy, and therefore we are going to start with story, right? Because I think that is, to me, probably one of the most important things. So you might say, all right, I don't know about you, but in my experience and in talking with a number of colleagues over the 15 years or so that I've been working with gifted and talented, a lot of times we're expected to make the case for why gifted services matter, why they should be present, why not just offer everybody a lot of the same things or offer everybody everything. And so sometimes we are the ones who have to carry that torch, right? We're the ones who have to say, no, gifted services do matter. They're not elite, right? They are meant for the kids who need them. And the gifted identification also matters. So we have a lot of work to do, speaking from our district as well as others that I've worked with, right? We have a lot of work to do to make sure that the things that we're offering are, we like to think about that they are worthy, that they are relevant, and that they are challenging. So if we're doing something with children, right, it needs to be worthy of the time they spend with it. It needs to be relevant to those kids, and it needs to be challenging. One of the folks that I'm learning from currently is Dr. Emily Mofield, and some of you probably know her book, Collaboration, Co-Teaching, and Coaching in Gifted Ed. Dr. Mofield has published a number of things. I love what it is because it's very timely and it's also very practical in its nature. But I like her analogies too, so I'd like to share those here with you before we dive into Top Gun a little bit. She talks about, hey, we can do things that are very uninteresting, like they're not interesting and they're not challenging. And some of our kids live in that environment, unfortunately, sometimes. Hopefully not for long, but sometimes they do, right? Things aren't interesting, they're not challenging. And she says, think of that as like the cornflakes, right? Like that's like eating cornflakes every day. It's okay sometimes, and it'll do some stuff for you, but it's not really going to get you excited, right? And then sometimes kids live in this world that's interesting, but it's not really important, or it's not really challenging. So it's very interesting. It's not really challenging. So if you think of that as a cereal, right? If cornflakes is not interesting and not challenging, then maybe we throw some marshmallows, we throw some sugar on it, and it becomes Lucky Charms, right? And so it becomes interesting, but not really challenging, right? It's kind of the fluff and stuff approach, right? And so we have to be careful that our kids aren't spending too much time there. Everybody likes a good bowl of Lucky Charms. Nothing wrong with Lucky Charms, but that's not really where we're going to grow, right? And then we can also have on that same continuum, right? We can have kids getting things that are super hard. They're super challenging, but they're not very interesting. And Dr. Mofield says, like, that's kind of like eating shredded wheat every day. Like, again, nothing wrong with shredded wheat, but it's just kind of the thing, right? It's not what you want to be eating every day. And so our challenge as gifted coordinators, as gifted specialists, as teachers, right, is to find that sweet spot, right, that is both challenging and also interesting for our kids, because that's really what they want, right? That's what's going to bring them back. That's what's going to help them to grow. It's what they need, and ultimately it's what they deserve, right? And I know you guys do that work, and you're always trying to find that thing that will keep them there.
I don't know, Michael, you're making me feel bad that I like shredded wheat.
No, I always feel bad because I feel like I'm picking on cereals, and that's, you know, I certainly will eat any of them that anybody wants to provide for me. So I enjoy your shredded wheat. And but so as we think through that analogy, it kind of led me to this idea of, hey, what are some things that we've been watching lately? And so it got me to thinking about, like, there are some lessons probably from Top Gun. If we didn't have some copyright issues, we might like have a little Highway to the Danger Zone playing for us. So we could tune that up here for a little bit. But so many of us, maybe some of you weren't around for the original in 1986, but we're clearly around for the newest edition, right, of Maverick. And so as I was watching those, and I was thinking about, like, there are some lessons here we could probably pull out for gifted, and how they play in with giving kids opportunities to shine, and how they also play in with the importance of what we do with our assessments, and then what we do with our data from those assessments. So a couple lessons here, and you can see I like 5 versus 6, so that's why I made it 5 and 5A. So when you think about Top Gun, you think about Top Gun Maverick, right? Like certainly the central figure is Maverick, right? But if you think, as we remember who he was, right? Or he wasn't the typical pleaser, right? He wasn't the one who was going after becoming in command, but he had skills, right? He had the skills that some other folks probably did not. He throughout, right, was the one who was willing to push the envelope to do the extra, but he also pushed buttons, and that kind of got him in trouble, right? He didn't always follow the rules, you know, for those of us who are big fans, right? Like, so we're used to him buzzing the tower, right, and getting demoted for that, and losing all those things that go on through there. And he really probably should have been overlooked by all the measures, right? But he wasn't, right? Because somebody was watching out for him. So there's so many lessons here that we can learn. You know, Maverick throughout, right? One of the famous quotes, right, is, you know, it's not your flying, it's your attitude. And we know, those of us who work closely with gifted students, and I know all of you do, you know, we walk that fine line between wanting our gifted kids to be themselves, and also recognizing they have to learn the world around them in order to reach their potential. So those are kind of the first 2 pieces, and then we hit the 5 lessons, right? So the first one being, you know, we have to help our kids know what they love, and then we have to understand that, and hopefully we encourage them to do what they love, right? So we assume, based on his skill set, right, that Maverick could have done so very many things, but ultimately what he professes to love is flying, right? And that's what he does, right? He doesn't want to be the leader. He doesn't want to be in charge, although we notice he leads from within throughout. So helping our kids know, number one, that they are allowed to do what they love, regardless of what that thing is, right? Kids also deserve to be able to see excellence. They deserve to be around other folks. They deserve to be around adults and other kids who model what excellence looked like, right? It reminds me, right, of when in the first movie, right, when Maverick really needed to learn, you know, who was it that jumped in the plane and kind of surprised him? It was Viper, right? It was the Tom Skerritt character, right? We can talk about him going below the flight deck and messing things up, and then the whole fight that ensues there, but that's kind of a show for another day, right? But what Viper did was showed him what was possible, but he also knew what was within Maverick, and so he was encouraging that. Kind of third, right, is this idea of being open-minded. You know, when you think about, or when I think about where it is that we see Maverick and where we see them have the most difficulty, right? Maybe it's their ability, right? But more often it's more about how they see the situation and how they approach their problems, right? Our kids, our gifted kids, are often very ready to answer the question, but they haven't always understood the bigger challenge or the bigger situation that it sits within. And so helping our gifted kids see that the world around them is bigger than the quick solution that they may see. Also helping kids realize that growing is a process, right? Maybe it really wasn't 36 years between Top Gun and Maverick, but in real time, right? Growth takes that, right? It takes time. It takes me remembering to slow down for kids sometimes and giving them that space to learn. And it also hopefully allowing kids to appreciate that they're going to learn from their peers, and that it is also okay to not do well on a given day or a given week, or perhaps even a given year of their life, that they can come back and they can try again. And then as we move into the fifth one, right, your tribe matters. The folks you surround yourself with matters. I want people to love everybody, but I also want them to surround themselves with folks that are going to push them to be their best, right? We know in the movie, right, even though Maverick and Iceman were combative, right, throughout, they were the ones who were going to push each other to be their very best. And they made each other better in the end. And really, in the end, it just leads us into point 5A, right? Everybody needs an advocate. And we see that, right, in Top Gun Maverick when it's Iceman who is there to bring him back, to fight for him, to advocate for him. And so often, and I know you do this for your kids, right? So often it's our gifted kids who advocate for one another. They're the ones who can push us. They can push other teachers. They can push the systems to be more flexible and to design more towards the edges. So I hope that gets us off to a good start here.
Well, you brought up some really key points that we need to think about in terms of, I think seeing the excellence is a really interesting point. And full disclosure, I had an opportunity to see Michael present last week at the North Carolina Gifted Conference, and he went around the room and asked folks in the room, what are some of the things that you're doing to give your kids opportunities to shine, and also, you know, opportunities to see excellence. So I think that's an interesting point for people to think about for themselves, is the exposure that they're able to provide. And I also love the point that you made about helping kids see the situation and approach to problems. And I do think that for many gifted students, being the first one to raise their hand and having the right answer, I mean, you know, that's very satisfying, but oftentimes that's not enough. And if they don't learn to go past that in the opportunities that we can provide for them, they're not always going to have an easy time when they get to higher education or to the working world, because that style, you know, being always being right is great, but it's not always the best way to succeed. Let me step back and let you carry on, Michael.
No, thank you for that. I think it's so important, right? Years ago, Kathy Seeley wrote a math text, which was just simply titled "Faster Isn't Smarter." right? And so often our kids, and look, I mean, pointing finger at self, so blame myself, right? We like the kid who will pop their hand up first, and so our kids, they learn that, and it's okay, right? I want kids to know, I want them to be quick and to know all those things, but when I think about my job now, it's very rarely the first solution that I come up with that's the best solution. And it's very rarely the first idea that somebody throws out in a meeting that is the one that's going to turn the tide, right? Like it's the one that's mulled around, it's kicked around. And so, the more we help our kids with that, I think the more we're preparing them for the future, along with the academic piece, right? You still need the academics to be able to do that. So, so as we think about this with this whole concept, right, along with the COGAT, along with the Iowa assessments, one of the pieces that we've been trying to pull together is just this concept that we know Jonathan Plucker and Scott Peters talk about, and so rightfully so, right? Like that kids need opportunities to learn, right? The kid who's never been in a swimming pool is probably not as likely to be a good swimmer as the one who does get in the pool. The kid who's never been on a stage is not as likely to be a great performer, even though the potential may be within him or her, as the kid who does get that opportunity. So we know opportunities to learn matter, but in my experience, and in working with our schools, we also need kind of quick hits, right? Like we need smaller chunks that aren't big units, that aren't necessarily getting into an advanced course, right? Those are great and they're so needed, but we also need opportunities to see kids shine, right? And so we've been trying to work on this concept of where can we find opportunities to shine? And truly, assessments are one of those places, right? I'm sure you find it, the more I look at our data, the more I see kids popping in the data that we wouldn't expect. They may not be the highest scoring, but they might be the highest scoring compared to other kids of similar backgrounds, of similar mindsets, of similar experiences. And again, I go back to that picture of the baseball field and the mountain, right? If we find that kid who's on the mountain and he seems to have figured out a little bit of baseball, he's probably going to do pretty well when he gets on the baseball field. That kid who has struggled but figures out some of the nonverbal questions on the COGAT, he might really blow some stuff up if we just give him a chance, right? And so that's one of the things, as we try to expand our vision of what giftedness is and where we're going to see it. And this is an evolution, right? This is the start or probably the midpoint of something. It's not the thing, right? We are working towards it, and we keep trying to find these opportunities to shine, because we know in some cases, people really need a more accessible entry point, right? They need a way to get started. Kids need that opportunity to shine. They need opportunities to be heard, and they need opportunities to experience services, right? So as we match all these things, our ultimate goal, and in a lot of folks I've talked to, this is where we have the great discussions, right, is how do we make an entry point for gifted programs that teachers will engage with and that students will engage with and that we can all learn from. So I promised I wouldn't turn this into a dissertation talk, right? But data is good, right? Vickie likes some data, so I wanted to make sure that we share some of this. So this is a very broad, I'll give you a very broad view of what this is. This is looking at proportionality within our district. We had, at this point, we had 20 elementary schools. I think there are 20 numbers up there. Yes, 20. So we had 20 elementary schools. And what we did is we kind of looked at what was the likelihood that a student would be identified if they were white, and then what was the likelihood of a student be identified if they were Black or if they are Hispanic. So here, I believe the blue lines would be a Black student, and the orangish lines, never sure how those colors come through on a webinar like this, but those orangish lines would be the likelihood, actually the number of students the likelihood that a student would be identified. From that likelihood, that's a percentage, right? So then we could multiply that percent by the number of kids. And so the bars that you see here at zero would be, hey, you have the same likelihood of being identified. And the bars represent the number of students in that, group who were missed. And so I don't want to misrepresent. It was somewhere around 76 kids if we total all these up across the district, that we could say, like, if they really had the same likelihood of being identified, we missed 76 or 79 kids. I don't remember exactly what the number was. But this gave us a chance to talk about real children, right? One of my great mentors who I work with, if you go into her office and you have a concern or you have a question, she will always say, give me the name and the face of the student you're talking about, right? And that, bringing that data, this kind of data to that, allowed us to say, hey, at school number 7, let's go look and see what's going on, because it looks like that's kind of a good bellwether kind of school, right? We're missing some African American kids, we're missing some Hispanic kids, but not a ton, right? And so that's kind of where our study began. Anything you wanted to add there, Vicki, before I jump on?
Well, so your colors have come through perfectly on the screen, and I just wanted to give, just step back and repeat a couple of things that you said to give a little more context for this. So at the 0 line from which all of the blue and orange bars emanate either up or down, at the 0 line, in essence, that's the likelihood of any student in the school being identified. But what these colored bars are showing us is the differential for students who are in certain reference groups. And this was ranked by the proportion of Black students who would be equally likely to be identified as those students at the 0 line. So these numbers that we see across the top, running 1, 11, 8, 7, 4, those are just numbers to identify the schools so that we don't put the names of the schools out there. And you can see in school 1, that's the school where we have the largest differential for Black students. We also have a pretty large differential for Hispanic students, but not quite as large for Hispanic students as we do if we come across to school 3. A couple of other schools I want to mention are school 10, which is right under the S in school identifier. So you can see that Hispanic students are a little more likely to be represented in gifted and talented identification in that school. And if you come all the way over to the end of the bar chart, school 6, you can see that Black students are pretty much at parity with other students in terms of their representation, maybe over indexed by that much, but they're basically really at parity. So what this points out is, as many of us deal with, Michael has concerns about equity, and is he reaching all students equally? And so that's what this chart is showing us, is where he found the differences and how he knows these differences are there.
I should really have had you explain my data for me, Vicki. That was beautiful.
Well, Michael, I've been working with data for a few years, and representing it graphically is always a challenge. And we think we've nailed it, and then people look at it and say, "So this means," and you're like, "Oh, yeah, I see why you got that." So
yeah, so thank you for that. That's great. I give you the first gold star of the presentation. Good job.
Aw, thanks.
So where does this lead us, right? Because again, we can always be data rich and information poor and all that good stuff. So what we wanted to do is kind of turn this in and look, okay, to give you a quick summary of why do we have the NNAT3 on here. And just as a quick summary, in the study, what we did is we took the nonverbal section of the COGAT and the NNAT, which is also nonverbal, right? And we gave those to students before and then after we had intervened with one of these opportunities, with many opportunities to shine. So we're gonna talk about those opportunities to shine here too. But one of the exciting things for us as primary users of COGAT was that what we noticed, you see some of the highlighted areas here, was that in those top boxes, we always talk about the top box scores, right? Those are just raw scores, right? But the what we saw was that the COGAT was more, gave us a more representative group of students from Black and Hispanic. And again, there's no perfect tool, right? We need many different opportunities to shine, but this affirmed for us that one of the places we really need to look was not just the nonverbal section, but definitely including the nonverbal section of where our top scorers were. And to look at that in terms of who are we serving with gifted services, and also who are we providing talent development to. Because that talent development, again, is that opportunity to shine, or it's giving them more opportunities to build up their skill sets to where maybe they'll be, maybe those students will have a chance to be identified as well, which then again increases the amount of the dose of treatment of gifted services that those kids get. So we were very excited to see those kids pop to the top there, utilizing the COGAT nonverbal there. So again, let me ask Vickie, anything else? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I have a couple of questions for you, and I also have a couple of thoughts. So first of all, because the writing on this slide is very small, I just want to point out that we're looking at the NNAT data on the left-hand side, and we're looking at the COGAT data on the right-hand side, comparing two nonverbal figural scores. And you have sorted them. The Black students are in the far left, the Hispanic students are in the middle column, and the white students are in the right-hand column. The upper section of your chart is your pre-intervention data, and the lower section is your post-intervention data. Is that correct?
These are actually all post. This is all post. The top was grade 3 and the bottom is grade 4.
Oh, okay. See, this is why I got to check.
Together.
So I have a thought, and forgive me, folks, for veering into commercial territory, but there are a couple of reasons why I think you're seeing these results. Students rising to the top differently on the COGAT nonverbal figural. One is that when Forms 7 and 8 were constructed, they were specifically constructed to have an especially high ceiling in them. And what that means is that in terms of measurement error and the way the measurement itself works, we do a really good job of differentiating among students of all levels of ability, but very much so with students who are at the high end of the distribution. So I think that's one of the things you're seeing. And I think the other thing that you're seeing is that the Naglieri Nonverbal Abilities Test, the NNAT3, is constructed of a single item type, which is a pattern recognition item type. Whereas on the COGAT nonverbal, we're giving those students 3 different item types. And so they need to demonstrate their reasoning a little more across different types of tasks on the COGAT. But what that also means is that if there's a single item format there that kids don't understand, we're not penalizing them. So in other words, you know, if they have problems with one of the item formats that we're using, they still have 2 other kinds of item formats that will help them rise to the top. So I wanted to ask you specifically, Michael, and I know this is the data you used for your dissertation, yes?
Yes. Yep.
And so why did you go down the path of focusing on the nonverbal figural? Was it because you had another assessment that you felt you could make a more direct comparison to, or was it because it strips out a lot of the language, or both of those things, or something else?
No, it's a great question. So we knew that we were already utilizing the full COGAT for screening to some degree, but not necessarily universally. And in terms of the study, what we wanted to do was to compare 2 similar measures. And so we thought, well, if we can, we'll see what happens when we compare just those, like you say, the figural reasoning pieces between the NNAT and the COGAT, without necessarily looking at those other two sections of the COGAT, even though we know in our full screen or our full testing, we would use those two sections. It'd be interesting if we laid all that other data over here to the side too, because you get, as you know, and as we'll talk about later, right, like you get so much of a more holistic picture when you're giving the quantitative and the verbal parts too. But for this part, as you also know in a dissertation, you tend to narrow the focus as much as you can to get down to what's really going on. So I'm not sure that completely answers your question, but that was why we chose to stick with just that one section.
If Dr. Lakin were on this call, she would tell you it's a dissertation, not a career.
That's
Make it manageable. There's plenty of time to do all that other work.
That's right, because they say the most common degree is the ABD, right? So all about the dissertation. There you go. So this was good, and again, it was meaningful, I think, to the teachers because they, we'll look at them here in a second too, but for a lot of our teachers, amazing people, right? Like just doing great work on a day-to-day basis. Having them key in on something they weren't necessarily typically engaged with, right? Like figural reasoning is not something that they would do on a daily basis. It was kind of a refreshing point for them as well. It wasn't why we did it, but it was one of those kind of aside pieces. Was, you know, you can find those opportunities to shine in places other than math, science, social studies, language arts, the arts, and all those kind of things too.
Are we going to get a chance to hear a little bit about the intervention that you did? I think
Yes.
people will be interested.
Yeah, so let me kind of wrap up this data piece, but just by saying, you know, one of the things we came out of this was looking at, hey, what if we looked at those, as you know, Plucker and Peters and so many other folks have pointed out, like, what if we looked at those top 10% of students, right? Well, my specialists, amazing people, do great work. You know, one of their concerns is, well, I already am, you know, I'm already feeling overtaxed, and so one of the things we wanted to do is lay out and say, look, it's not that many more kids, right? So this is that same data set. And when we look at these, you'll see, we don't have to go through all of this by any stretch, but we were talking about adding 1 or 2 kids to a caseload to add opportunities to shine. And it was kind of that, oh, you know, I can do that, right? Like if this is going to make a difference to that kid, you'll also notice on this chart that the asterisks indicate that kid would have been recommended by teachers anyway. And so although it wouldn't have mattered that those kids with asterisks would have been tested anyway in this setting, but for the kids who don't have an asterisk beside them, they wouldn't have been included in our testing pool. And so we're finding more, you know, you're going to find those kids by looking at things like the top 10%. So Vickie, I hear what you're saying, and I love this part of it even much more than the data. So let's dive in a little bit. We utilized U-Stars Plus as our intervention. So like I said, we did a pre-measure, and then we did an intervention, and this intervention lasted about 6 weeks. And so I went into classrooms along with the classroom teachers. We utilized the U-Stars Plus framework. This is one that in North Carolina is somewhat well known. I'm not as familiar with across the country, but U-Stars Plus was developed here in North Carolina. It is, as the slide there says, right, it's using science, talents, and abilities to recognize students, promoting learning for underrepresented students, and it's all about opportunities to shine, right? So U-Stars Plus takes the idea of, hey, we're gonna intermingle a story that, or maybe some literature, maybe some nonfiction. We're gonna give those resources. We're gonna do some things with them along with some STEM activities, and then also show the teachers, help the teachers, not show the teachers, right? Teachers see plenty, but help the teachers look at what are some other characteristics that we might look for in our gifted students. So it's a framework for instruction, and it's also a framework for talent development observation for our kids. So the talent observation piece, right, is, you know, in line with the I don't know if John Lubbock gets all the quote here, or all the credit, but there is certainly truth in it. Like what we see depends on what we're looking for. And so if we have some guidance as educators on what to look for, it may help us work through what we would naturally look for. And so we ask our teachers throughout this, like, what would you expect to see? What would indicate giftedness to you? You know, what would be, what does being more visible about my giftedness look like to you for screening identification? Like I said, there's no one perfect list, but we wanted to narrow in and see if we could do some just brief job embedded in the middle of doing these STEM activities. So whether it was we were doing drops on a penny, we did air pressure rockets, we did painting with various liquids and seeing how they evaporate. We did planting plants in gloves, all different kind of things. They were all different. Some of them we had kids take home. Many of them we had kids take home if they wanted to do them with their parents, because that's a part of UStars Plus, is the parent engagement piece. We also knew not all of our kids were going to have that advantage. And so anything we sent home with them, we also did in the classroom, or did some version of it in the classroom so they would get it there.
So can we step back for just a minute? And I just want to ask, is this something you were doing in every classroom in the grade level? Is this something you were doing with your students who you already knew were kind of your talent pool watch list? What was the kind of opt-down mechanism here?
Nice, thank you for that. Yeah, so this was every third grade classroom, every third grade student. It included seven different classrooms. One was actually a dual language Spanish immersion class as well. So it was every student working and with the idea of being, hey, if we're going to be talent spotters, as Del Siegley says, not deficit detectors, right? If we're not looking to exclude kids, if we're looking to find talent, we need to do that as much as possible with the whole talent pool, which is all of our kids. And I will say, like, whether folks saw giftedness in every kid, I would like to think throughout the process they saw different talents in kids. So whether they rose to the level of needing something different, that's okay. That's certainly our goal, but there's also plenty of kids who just need that chance to shine, to show off a little bit, right? The teacher, the TOPS protocol, the teacher observation protocol, just to give you an idea of what things we were working with the teachers to help them see, that there are 8 categories within that TOPS protocol. And then within each of those categories, there's a whole list of, like, here's some behaviors you might look for. And some of those are the ones you'd expect, and some of them are the ones you aren't, that you wouldn't expect to see. So the different areas on the top on that protocol are: does the student learn easily for first? Second, they show advanced skills. Third, do they display curiosity and creativity? Fourth, do they have those crazy strong interests, like they can tell you everything about every dinosaur that ever existed? Fifth, I think, they show advanced reasoning and problem solving. Do they display spatial abilities? Do they show motivation? Do they show social perceptiveness? And do they display leadership? One of the things I wanted to be careful with, and that was that, no student is going to have all of those things. None of us, hopefully. Maybe you do. I don't have all of those things, but that doesn't mean that the student is not gifted or they don't need something different. So each of those areas, we kind of crafted a little bit of discussion, if not professional learning, around for our teachers there.
So I think one of the really important things about that is we, Dr. Lakin and I and many of the folks that we talk to and do these presentations with us talk about giving kids more opportunities to opt in. And this is a place, just like you said, it's not, you have to meet this list of all the TOPS protocols to be on the list, but show me something in one of these areas and give me a reason to look more deeply. So it's a great way to give kids more opportunities to kind of get on the list, get in the mix, get noticed.
I love that. Yeah. How do I get noticed, right? And again, it's hard to be noticed if the most engaging thing that I'm doing is a worksheet or something like it's. Certain kids are going to pop on that, but we need to give kids other chances to pop other than just the traditional pieces there. So, and again, I know so many of you are doing so many really powerful things we see out there. So kudos to you for doing that. I did want to share, I think, one other piece of data that came out, and this to me is the reason I want to share this is because to me this demonstrates why it's important to have both. Teacher observation, like that can certainly be helpful, but also the screening and the testing piece. So when you look at this, what we're asking in this graphic, right, is how closely do student scores on their assessments align with teachers' decisions? And so what we found is they don't line up all that well. And how we can see that here is the bold dots on the screen. Those are the kids that were referred by their teacher at the end of, referred by a teacher, not their teacher, but referred by a teacher. And the lighter colored dots are kids who were not referred. And so we can see, like, there are plenty of kids who scored bold and they did well, but there were lots of other kids who did equally well on the assessment. And so if we just relied on teacher observations, we would have missed a lot of kids. At the same time, if we just relied on testing, we would have missed a few kids. So to me, it's that, like, we need a little bit of both, but as Vickie, you were just saying, it's the or, right? It's this or that, not you have to have both. Because if we shoot for those ands, then we're gonna exclude a lot of kids who are just as talented, right? Just as.
So can we go back to that for 1 second? So your yellow circle is the kids who were referred and tested well, and your pink circle is the kids who tested well but had not necessarily been on a referral list. Am I understanding that?
Yes, exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So see how many kids in the pink that we did not pick up based on referrals. Meanwhile, we have lots of other reasons to look at all of those kids who may not have tested as well, but are the bolded dots on the bottom of the page. But these kids in the pink circles might have been missed if we had just left it to referral only.
Yeah.
So even though the theme of this presentation is not best practices, Michael, we're hitting so many of them: universal screening, developing a talent pool, using an OR protocol, looking at multiple measures on the kids. You're hitting all the highlights.
No, it's good. And look, I bring these things out because these are sometimes the things that are a little bit under attack. As well, couldn't we just do one or the other? It'll be more efficient, right? And one of my favorite Stephen Covey quotes, right, is we could sacrifice effectiveness for efficiency. Right? Like, we can make it faster, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's effective, right? And so as we look at when the data points that out to us, it helps make the case a little bit, I think. So we have one more slide, right? And want to kind of come back to some of our initial thinking, and certainly glad to address anything that's in the chat as well. But before we get to all that piece, we just have to do all the work we can to level the playing field for our kids, and we all live that. I need people to point out to me where I'm not making that happen for our kids, and likewise, I hope that I can do that for others, right? We've got to welcome all kids into this game or into this setting. We got to be willing to give students more of an opportunity to practice, right? They may need practice before they're ready for the game, but that doesn't mean that they're not as equally, they don't have the equal potential to succeed in this game or in this world of gifted services. We also have to believe that more kids can be successful, and then we have to be willing to guide them along the way, right? My dad will often say, like, there are a number of kids who are going to do just fine, whether they have me as their teacher or me as their leader or not. Those kids I certainly want to be there for, but I also want to be there for the kids who need that little bit of extra too, or that lot of extra, because that's ultimately who's coming to us and expecting us to do the work for them. So as we as a district are moving forward, right, we're really working more diligently to understand and use our COGAD ability profiles as we communicate with parents, as we communicate with teachers, and as we understand our kids, so that we can in turn plan instruction, right? So I've been excited to see some of these learn from your peer pieces that I'm going to be listening in very closely for, about just utilizing that ability profile, because it's on our horizon. We're using it some, but I know we can do a lot more with it. I'm excited for all those things that are on the horizon for the ability profile tools too. Ultimately, what I believe, right, is that if we're going to see the kids, we have to be looking at them from a variety of angles. Our assessments, we've got to use the results to benefit kids. We've got to utilize observations, but we also have to recognize not all observations are incredibly accurate, but they're going to be helpful for some kids. And we've got to be giving kids these chances so that they can shine. So let us do the work, right? Let's do the work to support them both as we look for them and as they are served by us. Let's help them to develop the grit that's necessary. We need our kids to understand that, what's worth it is often the harder work, but that's how they will learn to believe in themselves too, right? Is to struggle through the process, to know they've got support in that process. And then, as you see in the right-hand corner, let's grade our kids, right? Not just on their academic prowess, but let's really look at them in terms of, in quotation marks, grading them on real lasting goals. So we've been utilizing Lee David Daniels text which has then led us to our gifted goals in these 7 areas where we try to get parents, we ask kids to self-assess themselves on these. And I think, fingers crossed, in the long run, we will find that if we're matching that ability profile to the services we give, kids are going to see themselves achieving the goals that both we have for them and they have for themselves. So I just want to say thank you to all of you guys for all the work that you do. You guys deserve the celebration. You're the ones who make opportunities possible for kids. And hopefully we can all continue to do this work to help kids shine, not just today, but to see themselves shining in the future by giving them small and large successes along the way.
So we did get a couple of questions in the chat. And one person is asking about your identification process. Are you using specific cut scores, or are you using a matrix? What does your process look like?
Yes, so we have multiple pathways. So we have some automatic qualifying points, right? So if you're 97th percentile or above, that's an automatic qualifying. In North Carolina, we look at academically, intellectually gifted. We look at academically gifted in reading, academically gifted in math, and then intellectually gifted, and then any other combination of those things together. So our criteria look at giving kids just automatic kind of ways in. So if you're at 92nd percentile or higher in, on say the Iowa and the COGAT, that's an automatic. We call that our first pathway. But then we also have pathways that involve either one of those features, again, 92nd percentile or above, along with, we have 5 criteria that include a bunch of other things, including the Hope scales and Renzulli scales, some designated portfolio pieces. So again, trying to find as many ways to let kids show us that they're awesome as we can and that they need something extra.
And are you doing kind of a talent pool watch list? I noticed your data was from 3rd and 4th grades. Are you doing your primary identification at 3rd grade, or where does that happen?
Yes, we are currently our initial, kids can certainly be identified at any grade level. We have kindergartners who get identified, but the bulk of our large screening happens at 3rd grade. And then again, kids can certainly be reassessed in 4th grade all the way up through high school if they would like, or if they're referred, or if they refer themselves. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I particularly, and folks, those of you who are out there, if you have additional questions, put them in the question panel. This is your time to get them answered. And we will be sending out the slides and the recording. But one of the things I was looking at with great interest after I saw your presentation last week is I want to look more specifically at the U-Stars activities, and then think about how to access them for a student who is more of a verbal learner versus a student who is better at figural areas, or the student who approaches things through a quantitative lens, because I think there's a lot of power there for that. And I was pretty disappointed when I went out online and initially found that a bunch of the U-Star stuff is back ordered at the moment. So it's clearly very popular stuff.
It is. And look, as I said last week, I'm certainly not here to sell any one product. There are lots of ways to talent spot, but it also, as a teacher and as a coordinator, sometimes it's nice to have something that's already pulled together. So you may find that in another resource, but the U-Stars piece is certainly solid for both K2 and 3-5, and we've even had some people use some of those 6th graders. So.
Okay, well, it's Tuesday afternoon. We are at, oh wait, let's see if somebody else has another question here. Hang on one second.
Sure.
Are you looking specifically at quantitative and nonverbal figural scores for student readiness, or potential to succeed in STEM programs? Or is it kind of both of those things, or some other? So when you're thinking about STEM, how did STEM become the focus of your dissertation work, and how did those measures play into it?
I think probably in part, right, owning personal bias, right? As an elementary teacher previously, I was definitely of the science and math mindset. I also have spent a fair amount of time working in outdoor education. And so in those places, you see kids that are rock stars that don't do as well in traditional schooling. And so I think bringing the STEM piece, that was part of my rationale for why use STEM. I'm sure there are probably some awesome resources that we could have gone, or that are being used, right, in language arts. I believe there's a lot of potential in the arts to show, to see these other opportunities to shine that translate to academics as well. But that's really, that for me was the starting point there. Is, remember back in the beginning, I think the very first bullet was let kids know that it's okay to go with what you love. Like for me, it was going with what I love, right? And trying to share that with some other kids. We also, one last point on that is, we also know over the past 3 years, our kids haven't got a lot of hands-on exposure to things, through no fault of teachers, right? Just through the challenge of virtual instruction. And so there was also a part of, I wonder if we reintroduce that to kids, if we will see some of those things pop back up.
All right, well, now we really are out of time. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll wrap this up now. I'd like to remind everyone to keep an eye on your email for a link to the recording and a sharing of Michael's slides. And also come and join us on the 22nd at noon Eastern time We'll be talking to Trumbull County in Ohio about some best practices for equity in identification. And there's always more to follow.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Michael, thank you so much. And thank you for your excellent work.
Yeah. Thank you. And go keep rocking it out there for kids. It's the good stuff.
All right. There we go. Keep rocking it.